3 days after my husband died, I boarded a 14-hour flight home. I pictured it so clearly, my family waiting at the airport, arms wide open, helping me survive the worst pain of my life. But when the plane landed, my phone buzzed. One message, just 3 words, "Don't come home." No explanation, no one waiting. Just a cold text that made my stomach drop and my world tilt. I'm Claire. After burying my husband overseas and surviving nearly 30 hours of airports and time zones, I finally boarded the last flight to Denver. My body ached, my eyes burned from crying, but one thought carried me through. At least I would see familiar faces when I landed. As the plane descended through thick gray clouds, I opened our family group chat. My fingers trembled while I typed, "Flight lands at 6:10 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" I stared at the glowing screen, waiting for the reassurance I desperately needed. "Of course, Claire. We'll be there." Instead, Melissa replied first, "We're busy. Call a taxi." Then my mother added, "You should have planned ahead." The words blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. I typed back, "No worries," though my heart was collapsing inside my chest. I didn't know it then, but within hours, the entire country would know my name and my tragedy on the evening news. Before grief rewrote everything I knew about life, I had what many people would call a simple, happy marriage. I met Ethan when I was 24, during a summer teaching workshop in Boulder. He wasn't even in education. He was a young structural engineer giving a guest lecture about designing safe schools and playgrounds. I remember the way he nervously fumbled with his laser pointer and how his jokes about math being the universal language made everyone groan but smile anyway. Later that evening, as the group gathered for dinner, he sat across from me. We ended up talking for hours about everything from books to hiking trails in the Rockies. He asked if I'd ever been to the Red Rocks Amphitheater for a concert. When I admitted I hadn't, he swore that one day he would take me. 1 month later, he did. That night under the Colorado stars, with music echoing off the Redstone Cliffs, I knew I was falling in love. We married 2 years later in a small church just outside Denver. Not fancy, not expensive, but full of warmth. Ethan's smile never left his face, and he whispered during our vows that no matter what storms life brought, we'd face them together. For 12 years, we did just that. I taught English literature at a local high school, and Ethan built a reputation as a respected civil engineer. We lived in a modest but cozy townhouse near downtown Denver, with a balcony where I grew herbs, and he tried, unsuccessfully, to keep basil alive in the dry Colorado air. Weekends were our sanctuary. Hikes in the Rockies, movie marathons on the couch, dinners with friends. Every Sunday morning, Ethan would make pancakes shaped like animals, lopsided giraffes, misshapen cats, just to make me laugh. We talked often about starting a family. We converted the spare bedroom into what we called the someday room. For now it was filled with bookshelves and Ethan's model bridges and towers, but we always imagined it as a nursery when the time came. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Steady, loving, safe, or so I thought. Because everything changed last spring when Ethan accepted a 3-month contract in Mexico City. When Ethan first mentioned the opportunity in Mexico City, I was proud of him. It was a high-profile project, designing safety reinforcements for a historic building. He told me it was temporary, just 3 months, and he promised we'd FaceTime every day, and we did. For weeks, our routine kept me sane. I'd come home from school, kick off my shoes, and call Ethan while he sat in his rented apartment, laughing about the quirks of life in Mexico. He sent me pictures of colorful markets, crowded streets, and the skyline glowing at night. He teased that when his project ended, he'd take me there for a second honeymoon. But then one morning, I noticed something different. His voice was heavy, tired. He told me they were pushing the project deadline forward and that the work site was chaotic. "They're rushing things," he admitted. "Corners are being cut, but don't worry, I'll be careful." 8 hours later, my phone rang again. It wasn't Ethan. The caller ID showed a Mexican number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I answered. A man's broken English crackled through the line. He introduced himself as Carlos, one of Ethan's co-workers. His voice trembled as he said the words that nearly stopped my heart. "There was an accident. The scaffolding collapsed. Ethan, he was trapped." I remember screaming his name into the phone, begging for details, but the words blurred into fragments. Hospital, emergency, critical condition. I booked the first available flight, clinging to hope. The hours crawled by as I crossed borders and time zones, praying for a miracle. When I finally arrived in Mexico City, I rushed straight to the hospital. But by the time I reached his room, Ethan was already gone. The doctor's voice was gentle but final. Massive internal injuries, no chance of survival. I collapsed at his bedside, clutching his hand, begging him to wake up. His skin was already cold. In that moment, the world I had built, the laughter, the Sunday pancakes, the hikes, the nursery we dreamed of, shattered into silence. And I was left completely alone in a foreign country with no family beside me. The days after Ethan's death stretched endlessly, as if time itself had slowed to make me feel every second of my grief. I remember sitting in the stiff plastic chair outside the hospital's administrative office, my hands trembling as I held a stack of forms written entirely in Spanish. Legal jargon, medical terminology, stamps, signatures. The words blurred together until they became meaningless marks on paper. A kind nurse noticed my panic and guided me through what I needed to sign, gently pointing to each line with her pen. I nodded, pretending I understood, when in reality I felt like a child lost in a maze with no exit. I called my family again that night. I had spent the day arranging for Ethan's body to be released, a process that left me raw and exhausted. My mother answered on the second ring. "Mom, I need you," I whispered. "I can't do this alone." There was a pause long enough for me to hope she was considering it, but then she sighed. "Claire, it's just not realistic. Flights are outrageous right now. Your father's back has been acting up. We can't drop everything." I wanted to scream, to beg, to remind her that I had just lost my husband, the man I thought I'd grow old with. But instead, I said nothing. Melissa, my sister, texted me later that night. "I'm slammed at work. I'll call when things calm down. Maybe you can hire some kind of local service to help you." The text might as well have been a knife, so I leaned on strangers. Ethan's co-workers, men and women I barely knew, showed up for me in ways my own blood refused to. Carlos, the man who had first called me, drove me from the hospital to the funeral home. He didn't say much, just kept his hand lightly on the steering wheel, but his silence was kinder than any word my family had offered. The funeral home was simple, its walls painted a pale cream that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. The director, an older man with kind eyes, spoke slowly, using gestures when words failed. He explained the costs, the options, and the local customs. I nodded numbly, agreeing to a modest service because it was all I could manage. And so, 2 days later, I found myself standing in a cemetery outside Mexico City, the sun merciless above me. The service was brief. A priest in white robes murmured prayers in Spanish, his voice rising and falling like waves I couldn't ride. Around me stood perhaps 15 people, Ethan's co-workers, a couple of neighbors from his temporary apartment, and even the nurse who had helped me with the paperwork. They offered small smiles, gentle nods of respect, and tissues when my tears refused to stop. But my family wasn't there, not a single one of them. When the casket was lowered, my knees buckled. I gripped the metal railing just to stay upright. My mind screamed for someone, anyone, to hold me, to anchor me, to prove I wasn't as utterly alone as I felt. But when I looked around, all I saw were compassionate strangers. I had prepared something small to leave with Ethan. A photo of us at Red Rocks during our first concert together, the night I knew I was falling in love. I slipped it inside the coffin before they closed it. My hand lingered on the wood, cold and smooth, as if I could hold him back for one more second. "You promised we'd face every storm together," I whispered. My voice cracked, breaking in two. "I'm so sorry you had to weather this one without me." The priest's words continued, but I couldn't understand them. All I heard was the silence Ethan left behind. A silence so loud it drowned out everything else. After the burial, Carlos placed a hand on my shoulder. "You are not alone," he said softly, in careful English. His kindness nearly undid me. But as I walked away from that grave, clutching the folder of official papers and a bill I didn't know how I'd pay, the truth became painfully clear. I had buried my husband in a foreign country, among strangers, because the people who should have been there, the people who had raised me, who claimed to love me, couldn't be bothered. The loneliness of that realization stung worse than the scorching Mexican sun. The morning I left Mexico felt heavier than any suitcase I carried. I woke before dawn in the small apartment Ethan had rented. His shoes were still by the door. His jacket still hung on the back of a chair. Every object felt like a cruel reminder that he should have been there, walking beside me, not lying beneath foreign soil. I moved slowly through the apartment, placing pieces of him into my luggage, the watch I gave him on our 10th anniversary, the novel he had been halfway through, the flannel shirt he wore on cool evenings. Each item felt unbearably heavy, not because of weight, but because of meaning. The taxi ride to the airport was silent. Outside, Mexico City buzzed with its usual chaos. Street vendors shouting, horns blaring, neon signs flickering in the early light. Life carried on, indifferent to my grief. At the check-in counter, I almost collapsed when the airline agent asked if my trip was for business or leisure. My throat closed, and all I could manage was a broken neither. The journey itself stretched into nearly 30 hours. First came a mechanical delay in Mexico City that kept us grounded for 6 hours. I sat slumped in a plastic chair at the gate, clutching Ethan's leather journal, afraid to let it out of my sight. Around me, families complained about missed connections, and impatient children cried. I felt invisible, just another traveler with baggage no one could see. When the plane finally took off, turbulence rattled the cabin so violently that even the flight attendants remained seated. My stomach lurched, but the chaos in the air felt small compared to the storm inside me. We landed in Houston long after midnight. I missed my connecting flight and was forced to spend the night in an airport hotel. The bed was clean, the sheets crisp, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan trapped beneath scaffolding, his face pale, his body still. The next morning, I boarded my final flight home. By then, I had gone nearly 2 days with little food, little rest, and nothing but grief to sustain me. I texted my family one last time before takeoff. Landing in Denver at 6 p.m. Please, can someone be there? No reply. As the plane descended into Denver, the city lights twinkling against the Rockies, I told myself they must be busy, that maybe they would surprise me at the gate, that after everything, surely someone would come. The plane landed with a jolt, and passengers around me cheered softly. For them, it was just another routine flight home. For me, it was the end of the longest journey of my life. When I turned my phone back on, notifications lit up the screen. My heart leapt until I read them. Melissa: we're busy tonight. Just take a taxi. Mom: why didn't you plan better, Claire? Dad: it's supposed to snow later. Drive safe. The words blurred as tears burned my eyes. I typed back the only thing I could manage. No worries. But inside, I was unraveling. At baggage claim, I lifted Ethan's belongings off the carousel one by one. His favorite sweater, his running shoes, his mug wrapped carefully in clothes. Each piece was like a fragment of him, and I clutched them as if holding on to him himself. Then, as if to punctuate the cruelty of it all, one of the suitcases slipped from the cart and burst open, scattering his clothes across the shiny airport floor. I dropped to my knees, sobbing, gathering his belongings with trembling hands. A sweater that still faintly smelled of him, a tie he wore to our anniversary dinners, a baseball cap he wore on hikes, my vision blurred with tears. I was dimly aware of strangers watching, whispering, moving around me. Then a gentle voice broke through the noise. Let me help you, ma'am. I looked up and saw a woman in an airport vest kneeling beside me. Her name tag read, Janet. She began folding Ethan's shirts, her hands steady and kind. She didn't rush me, didn't judge me. She just helped. When the last piece was packed away, she touched my arm softly. Are you okay? She asked. It was such a simple question, one my own family hadn't asked once since Ethan died, and it broke me open. My husband died, I whispered, my throat raw. I just buried him in Mexico, and now I'm here, alone. Her eyes softened, and without hesitation, she said, I'm so sorry. No one should have to come home like this. She walked me to the taxi stand, carrying one of the bags herself. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. Take care of yourself. You're stronger than you feel right now. Her words were more comfort than my own family had offered. When the taxi pulled away from the airport, I stared out at the familiar streets of Denver. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, catching in the headlights. The city looked the same, but I was not. I was a widow now, returning to a home that would never be the same, and I was returning alone. The taxi ride from Denver International Airport to my townhouse felt endless. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of white and gold. Snow was falling harder now, blanketing the sidewalks, clinging to traffic lights. Denver had always felt like home to me, the place where Ethan and I built our life together, but that night it felt like a foreign land. When the driver finally pulled up to my street, I stared at the townhouse for a long time. It looked exactly as I had left it 3 months ago, yet entirely different. Ethan wasn't there to open the door, to take my bag, to kiss my forehead. The porch light flickered weakly, a bulb on the verge of dying. The driver helped me unload the suitcases. He hesitated before leaving, his eyes lingering on me. "Are you sure you're okay, miss? You look, well, like you've been through a lot." I forced a nod, tipped him, and watched his taillights disappear down the snowy street. The moment I opened the door, a blast of icy air hit me. The house was freezing, so cold I could see my breath in the beam of the hallway light. My first thought was that maybe the thermostat had been turned off. I had asked my family to check the house to make sure the heat was running, but clearly they hadn't bothered. Inside, the air smelled stale. A pile of unopened mail overflowed from the basket by the door. My stomach twisted. Melissa had promised she'd handle it. The refrigerator hummed faintly in the kitchen, but when I opened it, the shelves were nearly empty. Just expired condiments and a container of something unidentifiable growing mold. My father had said he'd stock up on essentials before I got home. Another promise broken. I dragged my luggage upstairs, my body heavy with exhaustion. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed, not without Ethan. So I curled up in the armchair by the window, still wearing my coat, surrounded by the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the closet. I must have dozed off because when I woke, the house was even colder. That's when I heard it. A strange gurgling sound from the kitchen. I stumbled downstairs, my head foggy, and flipped on the light. My heart dropped. Water was pouring from a crack in the ceiling, cascading down the walls, pooling across the tile floor. The pipe must have burst during the cold snap. I splashed through 3 inches of icy water, rushing to the utility closet where the main shut-off valve was located. My hand shook as I gripped the wheel, metal so cold it burned my skin. After several desperate attempts, the flow slowed, then stopped. But the damage was already done. Water dripped from the light fixtures. The hardwood floor in the dining room had already begun to warp. My kitchen looked like a disaster zone. I called my sister. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice distracted. "Hey Claire, can this wait? I've got clients coming over for dinner." "The house is flooded," I said flatly. "A pipe burst. There's water everywhere. The heat's not working and it's freezing in here." There was a pause. Then Melissa sighed. "That sucks. Did you try calling a plumber? Maybe check Angie's list?" I closed my eyes, biting back a sob. "Melissa, I just buried my husband. I've been traveling for 30 hours straight. I can't stay here. It's dangerous. Can I come to your place tonight?" The silence that followed told me everything before she even spoke. Actually, that's not really a good idea. Our guest room is full of stuff, and we've got plans. Maybe call Mom and Dad. I hung up before she could say more. I dialed my parents next. My mother picked up the first ring. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. "You know we'd normally say yes, but the bridge club is meeting here tomorrow, and we've been preparing all week. Plus, your father's back is acting up. We just can't take guests right now. Maybe find a hotel? That's what insurance is for." The line went silent. I stood in the middle of my waterlogged kitchen, phone clutched in my hand, tears blurring my vision. They had left me to bury my husband alone in Mexico. They had refused to pick me up from the airport. And now, when my home was collapsing around me, they still couldn't be bothered. The power flickered. A cold draft swept through the kitchen, raising goosebumps across my arms. I found a packet of stale crackers in a cabinet and ate them standing in ankle-deep water, my body numb from both cold and despair. At some point, I decided to check the breaker box in the basement. Maybe I could at least get some heat running. The stairs were slick, the air damp. I gripped the railing, each step echoing in the dark. The basement was partially flooded, water reaching my ankles. My phone flashlight cast long, trembling shadows on the concrete walls. When I reached for the breaker panel, my foot slipped. My hand slammed against the metal box. A jolt of electricity surged through me, searing hot and blinding. I screamed as my body flew backward, crashing against the wet floor. My head struck something hard. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, my right arm tingled painfully. Warm blood trickled down my forehead. My vision spun as I staggered toward the stairs, each step a battle against dizziness. By the time I reached the main floor, I could barely stay conscious. I collapsed onto the living room sofa, shivering violently. My fingers and toes were numb. The house was so cold I could see frost forming on the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a high-pitched alarm began to beep. The carbon monoxide detector. I tried to reach for my phone, lying just out of reach on the coffee table. My arm refused to move. Darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. My body was shutting down. Hypothermia, shock, carbon monoxide poisoning all at once. In those final moments of consciousness, a strange calm washed over me. Maybe it would be easier to let go, to stop fighting, to be with Ethan again. But just before everything went dark, I heard pounding on the front door, a voice shouting my name, then nothing. The last thing I remembered was the pounding on the front door, muffled through the fog of unconsciousness. After that, only darkness. Later, I pieced together what happened from the people who saved me. It was my neighbor across the street, Mr. Lopez, who first noticed something was wrong. He was a retired widower, a quiet man who tended to his garden even in the snow. That night, he saw water spilling down the steps of my porch and pooling across the sidewalk. Concerned, he walked over. He called my name, knocked hard, then pressed his ear against the door. That's when he heard the carbon monoxide alarm screaming inside. Instead of giving up, he called emergency services immediately. "There's a woman inside," he told the dispatcher. "I don't think she's okay." By the time firefighters arrived, the storm had grown worse. Snow whipped through the street, rattling against windows, coating their boots as they rushed up my steps. They broke the door down and entered, heavy flashlights cutting through the icy darkness. They found me collapsed on the sofa, barely breathing. My lips were blue, my skin pale, and the gash on my forehead still bleeding. The house was dangerously cold, filled with toxic levels of carbon monoxide. One firefighter later told me that if another hour had passed, it might have been too late. I was rushed to Denver General Hospital in an ambulance. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching only fragments. The paramedic's urgent voice, the oxygen mask pressed to my face, the beeping of machines monitoring my heart. When I finally woke fully, I was lying in a hospital bed. Warmth cocooned me, and a soft humming came from the machines beside me. My head throbbed, my arm tingled from the electrical shock, and my throat felt dry as paper. A nurse stood beside me, adjusting my IV. Her name tag read, Kelly. When she noticed my eyes open, she leaned closer. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she said gently. "You gave us quite a scare." Tears slid down my temples. Safe. It was the first time in weeks I felt that word apply to me. Nurse Kelly explained what had happened: the hypothermia, the carbon monoxide poisoning, the concussion, the electrical shock. "You're lucky your neighbor called when he did," she said. Another few hours, and we'd be telling a very different story. Mr. Lopez visited me later that evening. He stood awkwardly at the doorway, hat in his hands, his eyes filled with concern. "I just did what anyone would do," he muttered. But I knew better. Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have cared enough to act. My own family hadn't. That thought cut deep, because even in my hospital bed, even after nearly dying, my phone buzzed with messages from my family. Not messages of love or relief, not questions about my health, but defensiveness. Melissa: "We saw the news. They're making it look like we abandoned you." That's not fair. Mom: "This is a total exaggeration. We would have helped if we'd known how bad it was." Dad: "Your aunt called us in tears. You need to clarify things." I stared at the screen, hollow. The story had already reached the local evening news. A young widow returns from burying her husband abroad, only to nearly die in her own home. The paramedics had shared details with a reporter, including screenshots of my desperate texts. The words I had typed: "Flight lands at 6:09 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" were now plastered across television screens, followed by my family's callous replies: "We're busy. Take a taxi." The public was outraged. Strangers online wrote messages of sympathy. Hashtags began trending. "No worries," echoing the hollow words I had sent back to my family. Local businesses reached out, offering help. A plumbing company volunteered to fix the burst pipes at no cost. A hotel chain offered me a temporary place to stay. The kindness was overwhelming, but also bewildering. Because while strangers opened their arms, my family, my own blood, was more concerned about their reputation. That night, Nurse Kelly sat with me as I struggled to process it all. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the family you find matters more than the family you're born into." Her words sank deep. I thought of Mr. Lopez, who had noticed when no one else did, of the firefighters who risked themselves to drag me out of danger, of the paramedics who worked tirelessly to keep me alive, of Nurse Kelly, who spoke to me with genuine compassion. And then I thought of Melissa, of my mother, of my father. Their absence echoed louder than any alarm. As I drifted back to sleep, oxygen steady in my lungs and warmth wrapping me like a blanket, one truth crystallized in my heart. Strangers had saved my life, and my family hadn't even tried. I didn't have to wait long before my family showed up. The morning after the news segment aired, my hospital room door burst open. Melissa stormed in first, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. She wasn't carrying flowers or even asking how I was. Her phone was clutched in her hand, glowing with incoming notifications. "Claire, do you have any idea what they're saying about us?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "The article makes it look like we abandoned you at the airport. My boss saw it. I've been getting texts all night." Behind her, my mother swept in, her lips tight, her hands fluttering dramatically as though she were the true victim of this entire ordeal. "This is a complete misrepresentation," she announced to no one in particular. "We didn't know the house was in such terrible condition. We had no idea." My father lingered in the doorway, silent, his expression unreadable. He looked more like a man attending a board meeting than visiting his daughter who had nearly died the night before. Not one of them looked at the IV in my arm, the stitches on my forehead, or the bruises across my hands. Not one of them asked, "Are you okay?" Nurse Kelly was still in the room, checking my vitals. I caught her watching them carefully, her jaw tight. Melissa paced beside my bed, her heels clicking against the floor. Do you know how humiliating this is? People are calling me heartless on social media. My coworkers keep sending me screenshots. Claire, you have to tell them it wasn't like that. My chest tightened. Wasn't like that? I whispered. Melissa, you told me to get a taxi. You refused to let me stay when my house flooded. She froze, then waved her hand dismissively. That's not the point. The media twisted it. My mother jumped in, her voice sharp. Yes, and you know how people exaggerate. Families can't always drop everything. You're being unfair, Claire. Life doesn't stop just because you had a tragedy. Her words hit me like ice water. A tragedy. As if my husband's death, my lonely funeral, my near death in my own frozen home were nothing more than an inconvenience. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. When Ethan died, you didn't come. When I buried him, you said the flights were too expensive. When I asked for a ride from the airport, you told me to take a taxi. When my house flooded, you suggested I check Angie's list. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. Not once did any of you ask how I was doing. Not once did you offer real help. And now you're here, not because I almost died, but because your embarrassed people found out. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Melissa crossed her arms, her face flushed with indignation. You're twisting this. You've always been dramatic. This is just another example. My mother's eyes narrowed. And we have always supported you, Claire. Maybe not in the exact way you wanted, but families can't drop everything for every little crisis. Your expectations are unrealistic. Unrealistic? I repeated, my voice rising despite the weakness in my body. To expect a ride home after 30 hours of travel? To hope someone would check the heat in my house during a snowstorm? To want a family at my husband's funeral? My father finally spoke, his tone quiet but firm. Claire, grief makes people say things they don't mean. When you've had more time, you'll see this differently. I turned my head toward him, my eyes burning. No, Dad. For the first time, I see things clearly. I've spent my entire life excusing your behavior, convincing myself that scraps of attention were love, but now I know better. Strangers have shown me more care in a week than my own family has in years. Nurse Kelly stepped closer, her presence steady. Claire, she said softly, you don't have to decide anything right now. But remember, you have options. You don't have to go home with them if that's not what you want. My mother stiffened. Of course she's coming home with us. That's what family does. We take care of each other. Do you? I asked, my voice raw. Because from where I'm lying, all I see is a family who takes care of their image. Melissa opened her mouth to argue, but Nurse Kelly cut her off, her voice cool. This isn't about appearances. It's about Claire's recovery. The choice is hers, not yours. The tension in the room thickened. My mother sputtered, Melissa glared, and my father looked away. For the first time, I didn't shrink back. I didn't swallow my words. I met their eyes one by one and said, I'm choosing myself this time. I'm choosing peace over pretense. And I won't apologize for it. Their silence was deafening. When they finally left, the room felt lighter, even with the machine still humming and the IV still dripping. Nurse Kelly gave my hand a squeeze. That took courage, she said. I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like finally telling the truth. After my family left the hospital, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the steady beep of the heart monitor echoing the truth that had finally settled inside me. I couldn't keep pretending. For years, I had bent myself into impossible shapes to earn their love. I had told myself that they cared in their own way, that I was simply asking for too much. But now the veil had been ripped away. Their words in that hospital room made everything clear. They weren't here for me. They were here to protect their image. The social worker, Ms. Patel, visited later that afternoon. She carried a thick folder of papers and a warm smile. "Claire," she said gently, "I want to go over some options for your discharge. You don't have to return home until your house is safe." She laid out the details. A local hotel chain had offered me a complimentary 2-week stay. A plumbing and restoration company volunteered to repair the water damage and install a new heating system at no cost. A meal delivery service had donated 2 weeks of prepared meals. Several neighbors had signed up to help with errands, check-ins, and transportation to follow-up appointments. As she spoke, my throat tightened. These weren't obligations wrapped in guilt. These were gifts, freely given. When she finished, she looked me in the eye. "You have choices, Claire. Don't feel pressured to accept anything that doesn't serve your recovery." I swallowed hard, remembering my mother's words earlier. Of course she's coming home with us. That's what family does. But what family should do, and what mine had done, were two very different things. I nodded slowly. I want to accept the community's help. I can't go back with them. Ms. Patel smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for me to say those words. "Good. Then we'll make those arrangements." The next day, I was discharged from the hospital and taken directly to the Riverview Hotel downtown. The moment I stepped into the warm, well-lit room overlooking the snowy river, I nearly collapsed with relief. A basket of fresh fruit and a handwritten card from the hotel staff sat on the desk. "We're so sorry for your loss. You're safe here." It was more comfort than I had ever received from my own family. Over the following weeks, kindness poured in from every direction. Diane from 2 doors down dropped off homemade soup every Sunday. Mr. Lopez came by to check on me, insisting I call if I needed anything at all. A group of my students' parents organized a meal train, leaving casseroles and fresh bread at the hotel lobby. At first, I didn't know how to accept it. Guilt gnawed at me, whispering that I didn't deserve this outpouring. But slowly I realized that accepting help didn't make me weak. It made me human. One evening, while eating dinner in the hotel room, I thought back to the conversation with Nurse Kelly. Sometimes the family you find matters more than the family you're born into. I finally understood. Meanwhile, my family tried to maintain appearances. Melissa called once, her voice syrupy sweet. "I just want to make sure you're okay. You know, people can be so judgmental when they don't know the whole story." I cut her off gently but firmly. "Melissa, this isn't about public opinion. It's about the fact that when I needed you most, you weren't there." She sputtered, defensive as always, but I no longer felt the old guilt pressing me to smooth things over. Instead, I ended the call with a calm, "I need space right now." My mother sent a card with a stock photo of flowers on the front. Inside, in her neat handwriting, she had written, "Thinking of you. Families always stick together." I read it once, then tucked it into a drawer, feeling nothing. My father surprised me with a letter, handwritten, which was unusual for him. He admitted in clipped sentences that they had failed me, that he regretted not stepping up. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was closer than anything I had ever received. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal. Maybe one day it would mean more, But for now, I stopped waiting for them to change. Instead, I poured my energy into something new, honoring Ethan. With the life insurance payout finally processed, I began working with our old university to establish the Ethan Carter Memorial Fund for Safer Schools. It would provide scholarships for engineering students focusing on safety design and include emergency funding for families who needed to travel during a crisis, something I had lacked in Mexico. Working on the fund gave me a sense of purpose. Each meeting with administrators, each decision about how the scholarship would function, felt like planting seeds of hope in soil that had been scorched by loss. On what would have been our 13th wedding anniversary, I hosted a small gathering in my newly restored townhouse. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, and community members who had supported me filled the living room. I announced the scholarship's first recipient, a bright-eyed student named Maya, who wanted to design safer infrastructure in underfunded schools. As I handed her the certificate, I felt Ethan's presence, not as a ghost, but as a legacy. His passion, his kindness, his belief in making the world safer. It all lived on through this work. Looking around the room, I realized something profound. The people who surrounded me weren't bound by blood, but by choice. They had chosen to show up, and that choice made them family in the truest sense of the word. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone on the balcony, snow falling softly around me. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was peace. I whispered into the cold night air, "Ethan, I think you'd be proud of me. I finally stopped waiting for love where there was none. I finally started choosing myself." And in the quiet of the snowy evening, I felt an answer, not in words, but in strength. A year after Ethan's death, I found myself once again standing in an airport. But this time, I wasn't arriving broken and abandoned. I was leaving with intention. The plane ticket in my hand was for Mexico City. I was going back, not out of obligation, but out of love. I wanted to visit Ethan's grave on the anniversary of his passing, to honor him where he rested. As I stood at the gate, I watched families reunite around me, children running into grandparents' arms, couples embracing after long trips apart. I used to ache watching moments like this, longing for my family to be that for me. But now, I saw them differently. They were beautiful, yes, but they weren't mine, and that was okay. Because I had learned something vital. Family isn't just who you're born to. Family is who shows up. Family is who chooses you again and again, not out of duty, but out of love. In the months leading up to that trip, my life had transformed in ways I never thought possible. The scholarship fund was thriving. I had met students whose lives would be changed because of Ethan's legacy. Every provision I wrote into the fund, the emergency support, the travel assistance, the safety requirements, was a direct response to the pain I had endured. What nearly broke me was now shaping a safer future for others. My house, once a place of disaster, had been rebuilt stronger than before. The restoration company had installed a smart heating system and reinforced the plumbing. Neighbors had helped replant my small balcony garden. I smiled each spring morning when I saw green shoots pushing through the soil, proof that life could grow again even after devastation. And me? I had grown too. Therapy helped me untangle years of family dynamics, teaching me that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I had lunch with my father a few times, careful, tentative meetings where he tried, haltingly to express regret. My mother and Melissa kept their distance, sending occasional cards but never addressing the truth, and that was fine. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for them to change. I wasn't begging for scraps of love. I was building something new, something whole, out of the kindness of community and the strength I had discovered within myself. On the morning of the anniversary, I stood at Ethan's grave in Mexico. The air was warm, the sky a brilliant blue. I placed fresh flowers by the stone and rested my hand against it. I kept my promise, I whispered. I carried you with me. I'm still carrying you, and I'm finally carrying myself too. Tears fell. But they weren't just grief anymore. They were gratitude for the love we had shared, for the lessons his loss had taught me, for the resilience I never knew I possessed. I stayed there until the sun began to set, the light painting the sky in gold and orange. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. Now, standing here and sharing my story with all of you, I know why I survived that night in my frozen house. I survived to tell this truth. Your worth is not determined by your family's ability or inability to recognize it. Sometimes the people you expect to show up simply can't. Not because you're unworthy, but because they don't have the capacity to love the way you need. That doesn't mean you stop deserving love. It means you learn to find it elsewhere, in neighbors, in friends, in community, in yourself. If you've ever felt abandoned when you needed support the most, please know you are not alone. Your story matters. Your boundaries are valid. Healing is always possible, sometimes in ways you never could have imagined. Have you ever been surprised by kindness from strangers when your own family couldn't or wouldn't be there for you? What unexpected sources of support have carried you through difficult times? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if my journey resonated with you, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might be feeling alone in their struggles. Because healing is possible, and new beginnings can grow even from the deepest losses. Thank you for walking this journey with me.